Hello, welcome to another episode of The Board. I'm Gavin Coughlin, Agile Coach, and today we'll be discussing, a myriad of things, estimating ROI. I'm off to a conference in Nashville. I'll be talking about what I'm looking forward to there. We'll be talking about backlog grooming, sprint reviews, demonstrating the value of Scrum and the benefits of changing a retro up. And if we have time, we'll talk about short sprints as well. And I'm joined by my two assistants here. We've got Kristen Donaldson, Kristen Donaldson and Paul Willow-Ling.
Oh, you did so well on your own name, and now you've just lost it on ours. It's so disappointing.
So, what do we want to talk? First of all, I know we got a question in.
Well, let's talk about backlog grooming first,
Okay.
and then Gareth's got a question on one of the aspects of that, which we'll cover in a minute. But what we were going to talk about was backlog grooming with a new team as compared to an old team, I believe. What do you think the differences are, Paul, and what sort of considerations need to be made?
Initially it's just starting the conversation amongst the team so that the product owner has there's a couple of things you're trying to get from the team, and it's partly how difficult or challenging it will be, or the implications of implementing this story essentially. So the product owner needs feedback on whether the story is too large, too small.
So you're suggesting the whole team should be in backlog grooming with the product owner and the Scrum Master?
To a certain extent, I think it's valuable. I think there's also in the early stages, it's also worth having a session with the product owner and the Scrum Master, maybe a business analyst, for example, or a subject matter expert, just alone and coaching them on how to write user stories, actually write user stories. But I think the backlog grooming session is actually looking at the existing user stories and then discussing them as a team to work out how you're going to implement and so I usually go in with the angle of for a new team. I couch it as story sizing, or just preparing for the next sprint.
So you sort of roll the two activities into one so that people feel they're getting value.
Because in order to size the story, the team has to think about what they have to do and that's often the conversation that's
when
needed
that happens.
on that story. Now I think it does change, the essence of the backlog grooming does change as the team matures, and because you often end up with the team splitting stories into smaller stories. They often write stories in the backlog grooming session. They work with the product owner, or the product owner will work with them. It's a collaboration, more of a collaborative approach, whereas in the early stages it's more one-sided. The product owner is presenting their user stories, the team is sizing and discussing.
And I've heard people in the past say, do we need to do backlog grooming sessions? Personally, I feel they're absolutely necessary. You can't continue on a sprint-to-sprint basis without doing backlog grooming, without sizing stories and without discussing these stories and fleshing them out or splitting them up and making sure everybody has a solid understanding of what they mean.
I think you'd have to run the danger of having a really long sprint planning session if you hadn't done that prep.
And I think what we're trying to avoid is the priorities changing for the team during that sprint.
Right.
And to do that, you need to have a clear understanding of what the team is going to do in the next sprint. And so we do recommend that the backlog is about 2.5 sprints, or there's about 2.5 sprints of work available. Especially in the initial stages when you don't know a team's velocity and what they're capable of, you need to have some work on the backlog ready to go if they're going to pull more work into that sprint.
Which brings me actually to Gareth Morgan's question, which he's contributed here. Gareth's just finished doing some backlog grooming apparently, so it's quite timely. And he's asked, how do you estimate ROI, return on investment? And I guess this is a consideration for the product owner when they are looking at the backlog, because quite often that's a factor in prioritisation.
So really you're, by asking that question, you're asking about what sort of business value you're getting from each story, really? I suppose you can almost size stories in terms of business value the same way you can size stories in terms of like complexity and size, and that's going to help you, because obviously something of high business value and that's got a low story size to it, you want to do that before something that's got a lower business value but a higher story size.
So that's basically something we've brought up here before. The weighted shortest job first is one of the formulas you can use, which I believe we've posted before and can post again. And there's also something I saw in a video about a month or so ago, which is literally people sitting down and using sizing cards or whatever you want to use for sizing for business value.
Yeah.
And I think that comes down to something you mentioned before, which is quite often a gut feeling.
It's often a gut feeling, I think.
It's
And well, you know, obviously they have knowledge of the business requirements, and
that's right. I mean, it's not literally it's an educated gut feeling.
well, that's right, because you're going to have like subject matter experts and people who are involved in the project, and they're going to have a good sense of what is of most value to the business. And I suppose because your stories, wherever possible, are going to be written with the end user value at the forefront. It's not going to be an exact science when you're getting the return on investment, but obviously a very informed guesstimate is going to be quite close to the truth, really.
Yeah,
especially
right.
if you keep it all relative to each other within the
that's
project.
the thing, because you can do even more simple things like just looking at the stories in a line and thinking, if we ran out of money after one story, what would be most important, and then applying that all the way down the line and switching things that way.
Yeah.
So there's a number of ways you can do it, some more formal and others just more sort of on the spot. Right?
I mean, what's interesting is ultimately the only way you're going to gauge your return on investment is by testing. You know, user testing or something similar.
That's right.
Because that's the only way you can guarantee that you've got some return on your investment.
So then to start doing that in the very early stages, the first sprints is going to help you with that for following sprints.
That's right. That's right. So I think there's a number of things you can do up front, but they are just not they're not precise. No, I don't think any of this is necessarily precise. But there are things you can do up front, but I think the ultimate is actually the feedback that you get from the people that are using your product.
We've got a question from Ella here. Sorry, we finished. Did I interrupt you? We've got a question from Ella, which is slightly related. She asks, is Agile more disciplined than Waterfall? Which is an interesting question. Because you could really sort of argue both sides of that. In that I feel there's more rigor around having meetings at certain times, what the meetings are, and the fact that they're time boxed. But there aren't, to me, as many meetings and things as there are under Waterfall.
It is an interesting question. Which one is more disciplined? I have a feeling that if I was to my first answer, what pops into my mind is that Waterfall is a bit more disciplined because you have a lot more measures in place, and people are hold you to your, the timings and your estimates a lot closer in Waterfall. Whereas in Agile, yes, you do have that sort of structure of the main meetings that you have to attend and have to facilitate and stuff like that. But they're in place to allow for a lot more flexibility, and because the teams organise themselves and not being micromanaged every step of the way, I think I can't think of the right word here, but it's really organised chaos. If you were to step into a room where everybody's working on a project using Agile, it might look a little bit more chaotic than if you stepped into a room where everybody's working on a Waterfall project.
I think chaos comes from the amount of communication that's happening. Though, and that's the key thing, that they think it's chaotic in the sense that there's lots of talking and lots of discussion, but that discussion is really positive. It's actually people working out how they're going to solve the problems.
Well, absolutely necessary to have that.
And no one working in isolation, and the team pulling together to solve the problem and all that kind of stuff.
It feels like in Waterfall there's a lot more controls. In a command and control kind of way. So you've got that project plan that's telling you what to do and when to do it, regardless of whether it's feasible or sensible. And change controls and things like that.
And I think Paul made a good point there. In Waterfall, everybody's got their defined role and they can work on isolation in that. Whereas in Agile, people don't have those defined roles anymore. And they should be a bit more cross-functional.
I often see, like, this is my, you guys just stop me when you have heard enough of this, but I think
stop.
That's
I often think like those Agile frameworks like Scrum and so on are training wheels for people, and they're training people to change their mindset. Because Agile is basically about 3 key principles, which is about, two, I think: reducing your work in progress and reducing the size of your unit of work so that you can increase the productivity or throughput in your system. And I think Scrum is a series of training wheels, like for a 3-year-old's bicycle, and you're just educating people to shift their mindset from this very large batch size approach that we had in Waterfall to this much smaller, easier to estimate and less variable batch size that we have in Agile, and that's all we're trying to do.
And then once those people have those principles and they've used what sometimes we've seen as the rigor of Scrum, they can start to look at other ways of achieving that.
Yeah, that's right. And the discipline is around. So we often feel like this discipline, and people have said to me, Scrum feels too prescriptive, and I kind of laugh, thinking, well, sure, it's but I guess it is in a way. We've got 4 meetings and 3 roles and a few artifacts. It's not. To me, it doesn't seem very prescriptive. But then other people, I sometimes forget that the project management that people have worked with on in other organisations is even looser than that.
It's conversely, actually, what Ella's mentioning here on the text is that she says, I guess many people confuse self-empowered teams, adaptive planning, embracing change, etc., to be a lack of discipline. Right. So I guess her question has come from the other side to what we're talking about. We're like, do you think there's too much? And she's saying maybe some people see that there's not enough discipline in Scrum. But I guess that's the real change in mindset from that command and control that you do in Waterfall to sort of letting things happen with the team.
And perhaps a lack of discipline is a very, very good thing as well. To give people this freedom to let them figure out things themselves. So that term discipline should be thrown out the window a little bit. You don't want to discipline people and have people working within constraints, because then they're not going to be able to show you their best.
So I guess it's quite a negative word for us, isn't it? Discipline in this context, I
guess so. Yeah, for me, it doesn't. I would say it's just discipline in a different way. It's just disciplined in a different, And
I agree with that as well.
I don't think. I do like the approach where the team is empowered to do their work and they're self-organising. Because obviously, especially on software projects, you've got a bunch of intelligent people who are quite capable of solving those kind of issues in terms of schedule and so on. They're quite capable of working it. Yeah, and I've often felt like the project manager was a scapegoat in the Waterfall model, because everything was put on that one person. They were the in between.
I agree.
It's highly pressurized. I think we've talked enough about the discipline. Because I do want to. There's one point that we're going to talk about today that I'm particularly interested in. I'd like to get your guys' point of view, and if anybody out there has a point of view about this as well. You mentioned this to me. We had our monthly scrunch or lunch where we get together with Scrum practitioners, and somebody talked about making sprint reviews engaging. I thought it was a very interesting point, because it's not something you think about all that often, but obviously at the end of each sprint you have your review, you show all the work to whoever wants to have a look at it. And these people, especially the product owner and possibly some of the stakeholders, have already seen the work produced throughout the sprint, and they've been maybe accepting stories and stuff like that. So by the time it comes to the end of the week, it's the team showing work to the people who've already seen the work in a lot of cases. Yeah, that's right. So how do you make it engaging? How do you make it the sprint review actually something of value? I have a few ideas myself. Just one really, which is
what is it?
Which is that rather than the sprint review just being take the form of a demo where you're just standing up there and showing the work. Make it a real conversation with the people who are actually driving the review and the people who are sitting there, and let it be not only a time where people can have another look at the work that's been completed in the sprint, but also if it's given them ideas about enhancements or new features, or actually maybe they decided that they don't quite, even though they've accepted the story, they're not feeling the way it works or something. So try to make your review a much more back and forth thing.
It's so interactive.
Yeah.
The other thing I think you can do is have the product owner deliver the review. Because you're saying they'd already seen the work. Then they're really presenting to their stakeholders and colleagues and saying, hey, this is what we as a team have done. What do you think?
And that's one of the other things, is I think the stakeholders should be present. And I think even if the team demonstrates or the product owner demonstrates, it doesn't really matter. But you're actually demonstrating to people who have a key input to what's going to be built, and they should be, they haven't seen any of the stuff before. So it's, I think it should be a celebration. In my opinion, I think the team should be celebrating their successes.
Well, absolutely,
it should be positive. Positive atmosphere for the work. I've just got a couple of other things. Gareth mentioned that when we were talking about the team, working with those principles and deciding how to do it themselves. He was saying he thinks that Shuha-Re is a good concept as far as discipline. And that's probably what we were referring to without labelling it before, I think.
That's right.
Which we've covered in another episode.
Yeah.
Also, Tony has commented, do we have any ideas about drawing the line in regards to detail in stories? That is, having a good picture of what a story entails versus waste involved in defining it.
Yeah, it's a good question, Tony. I really like that. Because there is that point where you do waste. You know, you're investing time in writing something which isn't going to be used. It's the whole Yagni principle. You ain't going to need it, and all that kind of stuff. So.
Plus that, some of that becomes part of the work of doing the story, and it can be tempting to do that ahead of starting work on the story. In these meetings.
I think for me, if you're talking about a story, if people have discussed it enough to be able to size it and enough to be able to start working on it, then you've almost discussed it enough. You almost have enough detail in there. And it's hard to know how to draw that line, and maybe you just
what we often coach is that people write the what and not the how in the stories. So if you're getting into the how, then
then that's too much detail.
There's too much detail, and people often put notes on. So acceptance criteria are usually relatively concise for the story, and then there's notes added, and the team can choose whether they they'll probably read the notes, but they don't. They can choose whether they actually use the notes. They might choose an alternative.
So it might be, say, something like, I've seen this done before in another area, it may be worth reusing this functionality.
That's right, if it's useful.
Which is, a good detail to add as a guidance for the team, but it's not telling them they have to use it, right?
No, that's right.
If there's something more appropriate, they can choose to do that.
And that's also an interesting thing I've seen is when projects start with new teams and they talk about stories, they do tend to put in too much detail there and talk it down to the nth degree, where they get more experience, they understand that they don't need to do that, and then most of this conversation comes out when they're actually working on it.
So you just find that with experience, people learn how much detail is required.
Absolutely, which is why I find that I suppose some of your first sprint plannings or backlog groomings can be difficult, as opposed to when they get further down the road and
get a bit more practice at it.
It becomes a bit more fluid, and people realise through experience and through actually working through the sprints that all this stuff isn't necessary to discuss and nail down at that exact moment.
And plus, often with early in the stages of a new Scrum team, acceptance criteria will include things like cross-browser testing and that stuff that eventually will migrate to the definition of done, or should be in the definition of done. So there's sometimes acceptance criteria naturally will get more refined as you progress or the Scrum becomes more mature.
And I've started projects with clients in the past, and we've talked about the stories we're putting in, and I can feel that they're anxious and panicking because they haven't talked about every tiny little thing that will go in. And that's where I suppose a little bit of an element of trust and coaching them about the process comes in, but it's completely understandable because that's the way they're used to working, and they haven't had a chance yet to see the value in it.
It's really not until the end of the sprint that they can really see the results and has something to justify the trust, isn't it?
So I think a good thing to do is, in terms of acceptance test-driven development or behaviour-driven development, you often the acceptance criteria should roughly map to scenarios for testing that story. And that's roughly as much as you need in terms of acceptance criteria.
I think that works. Hopefully that's answered your question, Tony. Gavin, do you want to tell us what you're going to be doing today and for the next couple of weeks?
Yes, I am flying to Nashville to go to a conference over there at Agile 2013, which I'm looking forward to. It's a 4-day conference, and there's a huge amount of speakers and events at this thing. So I'm hoping when I come back I'll have lots of new ideas and new stuff to talk about here on the board.
Do the whole show by yourself when you come back?
Pretty
just
much.
Just you on the sofas,
Pretty much, yes. So for me it's a great chance to talk about some things that have always been issues for us. There's a lot of talks about metrics, for example, and how to handle metrics within Scrum and Agile in general, and also gives me a chance to see a lot of people speak who've written some of the big books about Agile, like Lisa Adkins and Jeff Sutherland and Mike Cohen is going to be speaking. Look forward to it because I've loved his books. And Dean Leffingwell, the guy behind Scaled Agile, is going to be talking. And who else do we have? Lisa Atkins as well. She's written some great books on coaching, and obviously as agile coaches, it's going to be very, very useful. And there's some fun stuff in there as well, like how to communicate through sketching, which is going to be interesting as well.
So you'll be prepared for the course you're going on when you get back.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
Then Caselli Think Visual that we're doing here on the 29th.
That is correct. I should have a head start on that. And Jeff Patton, we both went to Jeff Patton course previously about co-making products, and he's going to be talking at it as well. And he's a very engaging speaker. Yeah. Also, just want to meet people who from around the world who are using Agile on a myriad of different levels, and hopefully a myriad of different industries as well. And there's lots of opportunities to meet these people and get together with them and socialize with them. And I think it's just going to be a very sort of inspiring, fun few days. And
is Nathan actually speaking at the conference?
He's not speaking. I thought he was originally speaking, but I thought he might be speaking about UX in Scrum, but it doesn't look like it now. He said he is going to be sitting by the pool drinking martinis while I text him about the talks.
Is that true?
I don't know. I've seen him after a couple of martinis. He'll be face down in the pool. But and we all have these lovely Boost Agile T-shirts that we got made up.
Yeah, I'm surprised you're not wearing that today.
It's quite mooby. So
someone did suggest that we wear it for the board, but I tried one on, and quite frankly, it doesn't look great.
So I'm hoping to come back from that with lots more stuff to talk about and lots of information as well.
So so are we.
Yeah.
That'll be good. We'll have to have a debrief afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely.
See what you've learned. Yeah. So that's pretty exciting.
So another topic. See, we still have a bit of time left. Yeah. So what do you guys want to talk about?
Well, what's top of mind? I know that the two of you are working on a project at the moment. What's top of mind for that, so that you guys can get some value out of this as well? What I'm spotting there is demonstrating the value of Scrum. Would that be useful to talk about?
Well, no, I think the thing that I'm seeing, and I see this every time we start new projects with, it's about the team fostering the trust and the collaboration aspect of the working together, because that's this style of project delivery relies on the collaboration aspect. You know, we really value the collaboration between the team. So and I think what's interesting is I ran the Journey Lines exercise with a group that have been. We've got a team that have been working together for 2 or 3 years, and but there were some new additions to that team, and we decided to run Journey Lines just so that everyone knew they were on the same page. They knew the backgrounds of the people that were coming into the team as well as the people who were already on the team, and it always throws up some really interesting insight.
So just as a reminder, that's where people do a timeline of their lives from whenever, like say the end of university to now, and just mention the highs and lows and events.
And we've talked about it several times on this show, and you know, it's just, for me, it really fosters the understanding between the team members. You know, it gives them background. There's often stuff they didn't know about each other, and they won't ever know about each other.
Absolutely, and I think this time you found even one of the guys that you've been working with for 2 or 3 years, there was some new stuff that came up about him, wasn't there? So, totally. You know, there's always something more to learn about people.
That's right, and so it's just that it's how we can kickstart that collaboration process is what I'm trying to segue into, and I think it's really important. I think it's just a fact of life when new teams, people get together, there's relationships that need to be formed, and it's how you form those relationships quickly and work out how to work.
I completely agree with what you're saying there, and that collaborating it can be tricky at the start because everybody is new to each other, and it's very gratifying for me to see when everybody does start collaborating in a natural way, and you know, sometimes it takes a sprint, sometimes it takes 2 sprints for people to do that, but it's really great to see that backwards and forwards, and everybody working as, you know, a team. It's not just the developers and the designers and then the client or anything. It's everybody's one team trying to get the same goal.
Producing something together, as opposed to the team producing something and showing it to someone and getting approval.
It's really great to see. I absolutely love to see when the people do start that collaboration. It's very satisfying, and then you can feel comfortable that something great is going to be produced,
That's right.
basically, because everybody's on the same page.
That's right. And it's a case of establishing that collective ownership.
Yeah.
That's the important part of this, I think. Because once, the team that I've been working with for a couple of years, they actually absolutely own those products, and they wouldn't, they'd be there, fighting or whatever it is they need to do to support that product. And if anything, it would affect them as much as it would affect the product owner if something disastrous happened, or and so on. So they
I mean, they're heavily invested in the outcomes, aren't they?
That's right.
Cool. Okay. And finally, I think we just have 4 minutes left, so let's talk about the last point there, if you guys want to talk about it, which is the benefits of changing up the retro, because that's something that came up when you had that scrunch thing during the week as well.
So that was just talking about, the format of the retro. Why do we need to change the format of the retro?
Yeah.
I think.
Well, as opposed to just doing mad, sad, glad every time.
Yeah, because basically you're just trying to get 3 things out of the what went well, what didn't go well, what can we change?
What can change?
To make it better.
So they were sort of like, oh, what's the point of doing?
Yeah, they're just asking, what's the benefit of trying a different format?
And there's a couple of reasons, I suppose. First of all, the team, if it's an ongoing project, the team will just get a little bit staid and lethargic about the retrospectives, and will know what to expect each time, so they'll already have sort of preconceived ideas about what they're going to be talking about.
Yeah.
And might just get a little bit jaded, and they love it, and you keep it a bit more energetic if you actually mix it up a little bit. And also, if you do a lot of preparation and you know what you want to run and it's something new and something you have a solid understanding of it, it's great to present the team with something completely new and something that makes them think about the events that happened from a different angle.
Yeah.
Plus, I mean, the different retros bring out different types of thoughts, don't they? I mean,
That's right. So
you've seen when you do something like the mood lines, you get a bit more about how people are feeling about the sprint in a really graphical way.
That's right. You're just shifting people's perspectives.
Yeah.
You're asking for the same information, but you're just taking a different angle or perspective on that information to try and get some. I think it's around lateral thinking. I think you're trying to go at people's, like moving on off the kind of, their usual pattern of thinking, essentially.
Exactly, and you want stuff of value to come out from every single retrospective, and to have real goals or experiments that you can put into place straight away. And if you're just saying what went well, what didn't go well, what can we do differently, every single
and if you're just getting the usual like teamwork and communication, you're not going to come up with anything new and useful, are you?
Well, eventually it's going to. I've run I don't know how many retros with this team, and I know Gav has run a few retros in his time as well, and it's kind of one of those, we've all been there and seen teams' eyes start to glaze over as they think, oh no, not this.
Here we go again. Yeah.
And
true.
It's just about keeping them on their toes, I think.
Yeah, and experimenting with retrospectives is obviously you want those solid goals at the end, but experimenting and trying something different is. It's really important for the Scrum Master to take a bit of chance and have a bit of courage in doing that as well.
I think actually Gareth, sorry to interrupt you, Gareth just commented here that he got good value out of De Bono's hats recently as a change up. So obviously, Gareth, you're making an effort to switch things up with it, which is great. And I know you've done De Bono's hats as well, haven't you?
We often, because there's six thinking hats, so you can actually change that up each time you use it. In theory, you can use a different hat for a different thing. So I often use the first few hats for setting the stage and gathering data. So I can't remember what the colours of the hats now. It's terrible. But anyway, there's a black and a red hat, which is positive and negative, I think. And you're talking about what went well, what didn't go well.
It's just a different way of framing it to get different results.
But you could switch them around. Ultimately, you could run those at the end when you're trying to work out what went well and what didn't go well in your retrospective, for example. And you could use the other hats gathering data or information.
And if you don't mix it up, stuff like using the 6 hats and using different things, if you don't mix it up, you do get eyes glazing over sometimes. If you do mix it up, you can actually get really valuable stuff out of it, and people enjoy it as well, which is obviously a great mix when you get something that's very productive and people are having a good time as well.
I think even if you just do a different icebreaker, like this one I tried a while ago, where I asked people to do a drawing of a graphical representation of how they think the sprint went or what happened during the sprint. and just started with something different like that gets them thinking of different things as well.
That's really useful, I found. That's a great icebreaker, the draw ahead the sprint plan. And I think I tried playing. I found a game called Jeopardy. Everyone knows what Jeopardy is, but I found retrospective Jeopardy. Someone had blogged about that, so I took that and changed it up a little bit.
I used that as well. I really enjoyed that, and I thought it worked really well. It took a little bit of explaining for people who weren't familiar with Jeopardy, but aside from that,
likewise.
It was really great doing it.
I played it on my wife's birthday recently.
Yeah, that was fun. So you keep mixing that stuff up, I suppose, and that's all we have time for today.
Yep.
Hope you got something valuable out of the show today. Thank you very much for tuning in and listening.
And we'll see you in a couple of weeks' time.
Yes, indeed.
See you.
Bye bye.